They say history is written by victors. But what if the real victors never held a gun, never commanded an army, and never stood in battlefields? The truth is, behind every great war and every empire's rise or fall stands an invisible power, the bankers. And among them, Jewish banking families left a mark like no other, financing nations, building industries, and sometimes serving both sides of the same war. Close your eyes and imagine it. New York, 1920s. The skyline reaching upward, a symbol of America's unstoppable growth. Banks glowing with golden light, filled with wealth and ambition. Now switch to Berlin. Gray skies, men in long coats walking into grand offices, carrying briefcases heavy with contracts. Across the Atlantic, whispers traveled in coded telegrams and sealed letters. While nations argued, money crossed oceans effortlessly. These weren't ordinary bankers. They were empire builders. They had the ability to decide whether factories kept running, whether nations could rebuild, and whether soldiers would even be paid. Their decisions shaped lives of millions, and yet the world rarely knew their names. As the Great War ended, America rose as a superpower. But Germany, broken and humiliated, needed rebuilding. And here's the twist: the very bankers who strengthened America also funneled loans, credit, and investments into German industries. Yes, both sides, both flags, both futures were silently connected through their money. Think of the irony. A factory in Detroit making engines, and a factory in Germany making steel tanks, both thriving on capital that came from the same financial networks. Behind the curtains of politics, loyalty wasn't to a nation. Loyalty was to profit, to stability, and to the survival of their financial empire. This wasn't betrayal, it was strategy. They weren't spies playing both sides, they were guardians of money, ensuring that no matter who won or lost, the bankers remained standing. And as the 1930s drew closer, the world had no idea just how much these shadow financiers would shape the decades to come. The story deepens. By the mid-1920s, Germany was drowning in economic despair. The Treaty of Versailles had demanded impossible reparations, billions of dollars Germany simply could not pay. Factories stood silent, the currency collapsed, and families carried baskets of worthless banknotes just to buy bread. But in the smoke and rubble, a lifeline appeared. From across the Atlantic, loans began to flow. American banks, many influenced or managed by Jewish financiers, saw both risk and opportunity. Enter the Dawes Plan of 1924, a masterstroke that re-engineered Germany's debt. Billions were injected into the German economy, stabilizing its currency and reviving its industries. But here's where it gets fascinating. The very same networks funding America's industrial boom were also rebuilding Germany's factories. Chrysler, General Motors, Ford all expanded abroad, fueling production on German soil. The bankers had quietly built a bridge across the ocean, connecting Wall Street to Berlin. Now picture this: a German steel mill hammering out metal beams. In another corner of the world, an American skyscraper rises higher and higher, both funded by the same river of money. Both unknowingly tied together in a web spun by financiers who cared less about flags and more about returns. Critics at the time whispered, "Is this patriotism or profit?" But the bankers had their answer ready. For them, money was neutral. Capital had no nationality. If Germany collapsed completely, the debt would vanish. If Germany thrived, both America and Europe could prosper. For them, the choice was clear: keep Germany alive. And so the web grew tighter. Banks in New York and London extended credit. German industries surged back. From coal to chemicals, steel to railroads, a new engine of power roared back to life thanks to the silent hands that fed it. But here lies the shadow within the light. These financial lifelines didn't just rebuild homes and schools. They also rebuilt factories that would one day produce weapons. Money had given Germany hope, but it had also given Germany strength. It was a gamble. The bankers were betting on stability, but unknowingly, they were also fueling a storm that would shake the world once again.
By the late 1920s and early 1930s, the money wasn't just keeping Germany alive, it was reshaping its destiny. Behind closed doors, politics and profit began to dance together, and the world would never be the same. The Great Depression struck in 1929, sending shockwaves through Wall Street. Banks collapsed, fortunes disappeared overnight, and the world's financial order was trembling. But for Germany, this crisis brought something far more dangerous. The loans that had propped up its fragile recovery began to dry up, factories slowed, unemployment soared, and bitterness returned to the streets. And in that chaos, a new figure rose: Adolf Hitler. Too many. He was just a radical voice shouting in beer halls. But as Germany's desperation grew, his promises of strength, unity, and revival started to sound less like madness and more like salvation. Here's the chilling part. While Hitler raged against international bankers in fiery speeches, some of those very networks quietly saw potential in him. Why? Because his vision of rebuilding Germany meant one thing: industry, roads, weapons, factories, jobs, a revival that would demand credit, investment, and the machines of. By the late 1930s, the world was standing on the edge of a cliff. Germany, rebuilt with the help of global finance, had transformed into a military superpower. The same nation that just a decade earlier had been crushed under debt and humiliation was now marching with confidence, its factories alive, its armies growing, and its people chanting in unison. But here lies the haunting irony. Much of this strength was not born from within Germany alone. It was fueled by money, technology, and resources that came from beyond its borders. Banks, corporations, and investors, some knowingly, others blinded by profit, had played their part in feeding the machine that now threatened to devour Europe. When Hitler began his march of conquest, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the world reacted with shock. But behind the scenes, many financial ties did not immediately break. Business continued, shipments moved, and profits were counted. Even as the bombs began to fall, only when the war spread too far, when alliances hardened and nations were forced to choose sides, did those connections begin to crumble. And yet, the truth cannot be erased. Money had already done its work. The bankers and industrialists who once sought stability had helped lay the foundation for the deadliest conflict in human history. Tens of millions would die, cities would burn, and the world would be reshaped in blood and fire. After the war, trials were held, leaders were judged, generals were condemned. But many of the financiers, the corporations, and the quiet money network survived untouched. Some paid fines, others rebranded, and many continued to grow in the post-war economy. The system endured, adapted, evolved, and thrived in the shadows. This is the price of power, when profit blinds the world to morality, when wealth and ambition overshadow the cost of human life. The bankers who funded wars may not have pulled the trigger, but their fingerprints remain on history's darkest pages. And today, their story is more than just the past. It's a warning, because if money once again finds comfort in chaos, if profit once again whispers louder than conscience, the world could be pushed to the edge once more. The question remains, have we truly learned, or are we doomed to repeat the same cycle, where secret bankers shape the fate of nations from behind closed doors?